Hey everybody, it's Corporal Speculation. Thanks for checking out my channel. Just wanted to give you guys a little bit of post-election insight, give you my thoughts on the whole situation. And whew, the right got stomped out last night. That's tough. It's tough. It really is. But I would say it's not super consequential. I said beforehand, my predictions were up. You can go check them out. That I was pretty sure this was going to be a left-wing sweep, and I was right. So there you go. And if you're a right-winger and you're like really disappointed because you thought that these elections were going to go super well, I mean, you could check out that video if you want for my predictions. But I mean, the reality is, these are deep blue areas. I mean, I don't know. Like, I get that there's some polls, and you can always kind of put together a story that makes it look plausible. But the reality is in an off year, non-congressional election, where the president isn't on the ballot, it's always going to be a super uphill fight to win these types of elections, especially in blue states, especially with a president like Trump who's so active and inspires so much hatred from the left. I mean, it was such an uphill fight. And I get it. I've been in that position where I've been watching those videos and thought, yeah, we're gonna do it, we're gonna pull it out. And I've seen this red wave story so many times in elections like this. We got to stop getting got by this stuff. I mean, really, it's just like, I mean, what did you think was gonna happen? Of course, this is kind of how it went. I know the Jay Jones one was a little bit of a surprise for a lot of people with those nasty text messages. But again, I mean, if you're counting on 10% of the voter base for Democrats to vote for, the left-wing governor and the right-wing AG, I mean, the odds are just not in your favor. I mean, I know split tickets do happen, but again, we're in an off year. We're in, a Republican president who's doing a lot of stuff right now. The left feels like their back is to a wall, so they're going to do it. They're going to show up and they're going to vote, and they're going to do it in higher numbers. And I've seen the situation perfectly reversed, and the exact opposite happens. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's just, there's gravity to these types of things, and that's really all there is to it. If Trump wanted to win, I mean, he would have had to follow through on some of the more impossible campaign promises. You know what I'm saying? Getting prices down would be one. If you got life more affordable for people, yeah, I think people would show up and they'd start making those, voting, and they'd love the Republicans for that, But the Democrats say they're going to do the same thing, and you want to know the dirty little secret? Prices aren't coming down. That's not how inflation works. It's just, it is what it is. Once you print all that money and the inflation rate spikes, prices are not coming down. And there's just kind of not a lot that can be done about that, unless you're willing to take money out of circulation. I mean, there's Austrian economic laws at play here that just cannot be overwhelmed with, tariffs or whatever else, they're working on, the Inflation Reduction Acts and things of that nature. It's just not the reality, as long as, they printed $7 trillion for COVID in one bill, the inflation was going to come with that, and if you are upset about the inflation, Lord knows I am, I mean, I think you gotta resist these big spending bills going forward, because that's what causes it, But outside of that, outside of bringing down the cost of living and things of that nature, I just don't see the Republicans, changing the flow of history of the back and forth between right and left. I mean, that's just sort of the reality of it. So I wasn't remotely surprised to see this. And again, again, I saw the same stuff you did. I saw some people on Facebook posting, 15 minutes before the elections were called that, the other side, that the right had won. And, it's just not the reality of it. And again, go check out my predictions. They were right. And if you want to know what's really going on, feel free to come back. You know what I'm saying? But with that, I wanted to kind of push forward past it. I think Mandami did go ahead and win in New York City. A lot of people are really scared about that, and I get it. I know the history of communism better than most. Big shout out to Martyr Made, and read a couple books on the Cold War. Studied some of the states that have fallen to communism, and it's scary stuff. And it's really difficult for me to tell the difference between a communist and a democratic socialist. They sound the same before they take power, so the only difference is after you take power, if you get violent, But I guess maybe that's an uncharitable view, because that's kind of the same for any political ideology. But I don't know. I've looked into the Denmark socialists. So they're very pro-market. I know Mandami does have some cool libertarian policies around making life easier for small business. Maybe that'll help. But I think it's a very scary thing. People are freaked out. I don't know. I've seen a lot of hot takes, so I thought I'd throw my hot take out there because you don't get this a lot. But as a libertarian, we got a saying. I think it was coined by the great Tom Woods, that no matter who you vote for, you always end up getting John McCain. Like the peace president has won in every election in my lifetime, but we have had a lot of wars. People know what to say, people know what to do in order to get elected. And a lot of times when they take power, they end up just running as a centrist. They just run their cities the way that the cities have always run, and it isn't that much of a change. I think there's a distinct possibility that that's how this goes. That being said, I also think, and another prediction I want to throw out there, is there are a lot of powerful organizations aligned against this guy. Maybe they hit him with some kind of SA type allegation, something like that, and try and get him depowered that way. Absolutely a possibility. There's a lot of power in New York City, a lot of money in New York City, and a lot of that is going to align against this guy. So we'll have to see how that all works out. It will be interesting for sure, regardless of what happens. And I think the whole country is going to be watching this experiment in New York City, trying to get an eye and an idea of what this whole situation looks like. But moving forward, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what comes next. We are on day 35 of the government shutdown. And Trump tweeted today, even though he had previously said that EBT benefits would go out, that they are in fact not going out until the government opens back up. No surprise, he held that back for the election. Just kind of standard politicking. You can be mad if you're a Democrat, but probably should have seen that one coming. It's just, that's kind of the way that it goes. I think there's a distinct possibility that the shutdown in general was pushed for this election, which is ugly, because, I got friends and family in the military, and, they're stressing about their money, and it's a lot to put on people just to help push over some Democrat governors. But, maybe that's what happened. So I want to get some more predictions on the books. I think really pay attention to what the government looks like when it opens back up. I haven't heard a ton of talk about the layoffs, but I think that they're happening. I've heard a lot about a 6-week trigger that'll intensify it, that they're working towards. I'm not sure what that could be, but I think that the government's going to look a lot different when it opens up. I think there's going to be a lot less employees. I think they're going to figure out how to get a lot of people out of there. Which again, I don't think is the worst thing in the world. It's not great that they're targeting it based on politics. But we built this giant government monstrosity to beat the Soviets during the Cold War. The Berlin Wall came down 30 years ago. It's probably more. It's probably time to start undoing some of that giant state stuff that we put in specifically to beat them. So I think that's a prediction. I think that we will... We'll see a very different government that opens up. I think there's going to be a lot of federal government employees purged out. And I think that EBT is going to stay down. I don't know if they're planning on food riots. Hopefully they won't get there. I've seen a lot of restaurants say that they're going to go ahead and give out free meals. But they say the veneer of civilization is 3 meals from getting wiped away. And I think that's a pretty important take to keep in mind. I think it's an important thing to remember that this can go sideways. But the Trump administration doesn't seem to have much trouble deploying troops domestically, which I don't love, but, I get kind of, for me, that's the same as the gun argument, where it's a safety versus freedom argument. And I typically always land on freedom. Just because I've seen a lot of the ugly things that the federal government can do. As a veteran, I've been sent to war as a 19-year-old, so it's hard for me to look at these people and think of them as, benevolent overlords who's really got my best interest at play. And then the last thing I want to talk about prediction-wise, I think that the next step for the Republicans is going to be election reform, which I'm pretty uncomfortable with. The idea of federalizing elections and passing all these laws. But that being said, I also don't love the mail-in ballot system. I think it's super gameable. I think people can do a lot of ballot harvesting, and that's probably happening. But I'm always a states' rights guy, just on principle. So, like I said, it doesn't really matter, at the end of the day, what I think, but it is an interesting conversation. I would love to hear your thoughts on it below and where you land on this issue. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's worth federalizing the elections, or if you want to default back to states' rights and let the states handle it. I'm particularly interested if you have the reversed opinion. So if you're a Republican who wants states' rights on this issue, or if you're a Democrat who wants it federalized, because I think it's interesting when we cross lines on issues and examining that. But I generally think that that's going to be the next big target is election reform and just removing the mail-in ballots. Which really, they're going to pitch it like it's the end of the world. But it's not like some thing like long-standing tradition. We adopted that during COVID because we were worried about social distancing and lockdowns and all that great stuff that went down, which I'm not going to get into. And it's just kind of stuck. I think it very clearly is to the tremendous benefit of Democrats. And Trump is already online tweeting about getting rid of it. Another thing, you heard it here first. If you go back and look at my first video, I talked about how the filibuster, the nuclear option, was going to be looked at, and removing it and starting to run things just on a bare majority. I think that that's probably going to happen. Trump is talking about it quite a bit. I just hope we think about it. You know what I'm saying? I don't really have much of an argument back to the Republicans who say the Democrats are probably going to do it as soon as they take power, it could be true. The last time that they tried, I think it was Joe Manchin was the only vote, maybe one more who wanted to keep the filibuster in place. And then this whole thing goes away. But we really do need minority rights. We need to slow down how fast government can legislate and, how in the weeds they can get about altering laws for their own gain. And I think that it's just a really dangerous thing to completely get rid of the filibuster and just give the, whoever wins 51% of the votes has, full power to do whatever they want to cement a permanent majority and things of that nature. I think it's just a really dangerous system. But yeah, so I covered a lot in this video, Shutdown, and all that, so, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on any of it, where I'm right, where I'm wrong. Tried out a Hawaiian shirt for this video. You think that works? Let me know. All right. That's all I got. Throw me a like, throw me a sub. You're not getting, political insight from combat veterans anywhere else, unless there's a channel that does that I'm not aware of, which is probably a strong possibility. But, watch that guy too, because combat vets rule. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.